Gospel reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew. In the tradition that is my home church, we don't stand for the Gospels. In some traditions, they stand for the Gospels, and I've always liked that. I'm not sure what the Presbyterian tradition is, but this morning we could all use the exercise. Let's stand for the reading of the Gospel. From the second chapter, verses 13 through 23, hear the good news. Now, after they had left, they being the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up and take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. Thus ends the reading of God's word. Please be seated. Well, here we are, the faithful remnant. You know that's a good biblical term and concept, the ones who have not fallen away to ski slopes or cruise ships or perhaps just seeking the relief of a Sunday morning watching the video in pajamas by the fire. And of course, Will and I are the B team. We consulted ahead of time and tried to share our lack of knowledge about how things should go and did the best we could, and we'll continue to do the best we can.
I think they're buying it.
They're buying it? Good. All right. We're kind of like the starters for the college football bowl games who are filling in for the other players who are not wanting to play and for fear of being hurt and not being eligible for the NFL draft. But we'll score some touchdowns. We'll do well. So, while it is still Christmas tide, as you can see from the decorations here, this is still the Christmas season on the church's calendar. I don't know about you, but for many of us, maybe most of us, Christmas is over. Yes, Boxing Day and the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and you know what the Feast of the Holy Innocents is. That occurs on December 28th during Christmastide, and that's when we celebrate those babies who were killed by Herod in the gospel story. and Epiphany are still unfolding, but many of you, like me, have taken down the tree, put away the decorations, and prepared to move into the new year. And the generosity of the Christmas season has become a stack of unpaid bills. So, what does a preacher say after Christmas? What remains after the birth? Well, for one thing, you get a fill-in preacher. But any of us who have had children or grandchildren know very well what awaits after a birth: sleepless nights, fears about health, dirty diapers, lots of bills, and yes, to be sure, the joy of new life. But all new life brings both opportunities and challenges. Joseph and Mary faced extraordinary challenges after the birth of Jesus, as our text details. Joseph had a lot of communication through dreams, as the gospel writer tells the story. And the warning that he and Mary and the baby Jesus should get out of town right quick and go to Egypt proved to be a well-founded warning, at least according to some biblical scholars and historians who have charted a time of killing of infants during that period of history. Others have suggested that Matthew's stories, and there are several of them in this particular passage, in which Matthew writes about so that the prophecy could be fulfilled. Matthew's very concerned about tying Jesus to the tradition of the Jewish people. And so he harkens back often to what the prophets said and how Jesus and the life and ministry and even death of Jesus were a part of the tradition of Israel. So these scholars would understand completely, I think, how someone might, perhaps like a political candidate in our day, embellish or even construct a biography to enhance reasons for following them. But the greatest challenge Joseph and Mary faced in the emergence of this new life was, who is this baby? Mary's vision prior to the birth and Joseph's puzzlement about the father of the baby surely raised many questions for them. How will our lives be changed? What hardships as well as pleasures will we face in this new chapter? While we all know some of what new life brings, most of the changes to come after a birth are unanticipated. So the essential qualities of life after a birth are paying attention, listening, adaptability, and even courage to face the challenges which this new chapter of birth brings. I would call this collection of things discernment. It brings us, who are moving into life after a birth, to make decisions that perhaps are not always easy. Disappointment and heartbreak will surely come in this new era of life, and so underlying it must be an attitude of gratitude for this new life, which is a gift. Life brings new challenges in many ways, not just after the birth of a child. As we stand today on the threshold of 2023, who knows what this new year may bring? When I think about moving into new life chapters of all kinds, I quickly think of a book I read 40 years ago called Transitions. William Bridges, the author of that book, wrote it to suggest a clear and simple way of thinking about the many transitions we all must face in our lives. He suggests that when beginning a new chapter of life, one must first of all face the ending, to let go of the old chapter. And then, secondly, to endure what he calls the in-between time of uncertainty and exploration before the third step of embracing the new. In T.S. Eliot's poem Little Gidding, the last of his 4 quartets, he put it well. What we call the beginning, he said, is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. In other words, before we explore what comes after birth, we must first manage the anticipation of what is yet to come and endure the discomfort of pregnancy and labor of the birth itself. A birth brings the end of the carefree life of no kids. All endings are also often hard, as all of us know who have said goodbye to those we love, whether through a death or a move or some other kind of parting. And then comes the in-between time, or what I've called the wandering in the wilderness time, in which the Israelites lived through for 40 years. Business must be taken care of and decisions must be made. But most of all, we must face the grief and uncertainties of what has been lost and what is to come. Joseph and Mary's justifiable fear of Herod, their dislocation as immigrants to Egypt, and ultimate return to Israel comprised their in-between time. And for them, it lasted a couple of years. I find myself in such an in-between time right now, having said goodbye to a major chapter of my own life and facing the necessity of living into a new one. My wife died this past spring, and being here with you today brings powerful memories of her funeral service, which was held in this sanctuary in May. So now, I have to live into a life as a single old man. I haven't been single since I was 19, and I've never been old like this. And that's new, as some of you may know. Probably not many of you, but some of you may know that. The ending brings not only loss of partner, but loss of privilege. Becoming old, for example, brings discrimination. Being widowed can bring isolation in a couple's world. And now I have to answer many new questions. What's the rhythm of my life going to be? How does one cook for one? And by the way, cook all the meals, not just once in a while. And the one that many friends have asked, will I stay in Albuquerque? My daughter lives in St. Louis. My granddaughter lives in St. Louis. But this has been my home for 30 years. Somehow people keep asking that question, though. And it's part of the discernment that this new chapter of life, or at least right now, this in-between time, brings for me. After birth comes the new life, when we must face the real challenges of life that we inevitably must face. The exciting idea of let's have a baby turns into midnight fevers and mountains of dirty diapers. The dread of a pending death is followed by months of grieving and vexing decisions about how to live the next chapter. So what are the challenges and the opportunities of birth this new year brings to you? I've already begun to discern some of the landscape that awaits me after the birth of my new chapter of life. I'm right now engaged in a pretty disciplined process of going to therapy and journaling and seeing my spiritual director, trying to sort out what comes next. I'm going to practice a dry January. You know what a dry January is? Sure you do. You're going to give up alcohol for January. Because I found that in the 9 months since LaDonna died, that sometimes I've comforted myself a little too often with that second glass of wine. And the health benefits of doing a dry January or eating better, all right, I've got to learn how to cook for one. I've got to re-examine my budget and my spending and re-examine my relationships and how I spend my time. That's some of the stuff that I'm sorting through in this in-between time as I move toward a new chapter. So what does this new life as an inhabitant of the year 2023 bring to you? What are the possibilities you might consider? My daughter and granddaughter and I went to church on Christmas Eve, and the preacher preached about the possibilities, and we had a lively discussion going home from church, talking about what kinds of possibilities await. And as you think about your life in 2023, what are the possibilities? How will you practice stewardship of your resources? How will you care for the body that you inhabit? How will you nurture the world, the community, the church, this church, the neighborhood, the family within which you live? How will you seek to heal the divisions that seem to tear our nation apart? Whatever conclusions and plans you construct, I hope that you and I both include a component of loving and serving others, living a life of love. We are, as I said, living in a time of terrible divisions, which have been exacerbated by fiercely partisan politics, radically slanted news outlets, and harsh and hateful expressions on social media. Hate and anger have exploded, and finding respectful conversations about our differences is proving illusory. I met Martin Luther King Sr. once, many years ago. Daddy King came to Amarillo, where I was living at the time, for an NAACP convention, and like his son, he was larger than life. This was a man who saw his son assassinated, his wife murdered, and who suffered from racial prejudice and hatred all his long life. And I remember his sermon that night like it was yesterday. He said, "I don't hate anybody, and don't you do it either." Reverend King's message, like his son's and like Jesus's, was that we must love and respect others, even those who seem to hate us. There are an infinite number of ways all of us, any of us, can build the next chapter of our lives in the days of this new year. Ways of loving and respecting and serving others. Maybe it's listening, truly listening to those with whom we disagree. That won't necessarily heal our differences, but it may allow us to recognize that we are members of the same body. Maybe loving for you or for me means changing jobs or volunteering with Roadrunner or Children's Grief Center or working with refugees and immigrant resettlement efforts that are so sorely needed. At the heart of the new chapters in our new years, of these days after the passing of the old and the birth of the new, must be love. The Dalai Lama coined a term for this way of living that I like very much: practicing warm-heartedness. For me, that captures the idea of how we should love one another, how we should care for our community and our relationships. When I gave my sermon title to Matthew and Carolyn this week, I underscored my request that the title, After Birth, be two words with a space between the after and the birth. I didn't want an overzealous spell check system to put the words together. But as we consider this new chapter of life, we should not forget the importance of that single word, afterbirth. The placenta and fetal membranes, after all, fed and sustained us in a way that allowed us to enter the birth into new life with strength and health. And so after the birth of our new lives in the new year 2023, we must acknowledge that we are sustained by gratitude for the life that has prepared us for this new life. As I prepare to figure out how to live as a single old guy, I will recognize and give thanks to the way LaDonna helped me to become the man I am and have the choices I have. Likewise, I encourage you to remember and give thanks for the strands, the people, the experiences, the communities, the teachings which sustained you and fed you and brought you to this new threshold. The Isaiah text that was read earlier emphasized that we should give thanks for the gracious deeds of the Lord. And at the heart of these great deeds is God's great gift, which we celebrate in this season, the gift of God's love in God's Son. So let's wade into the birth of this new year with gratitude and hope. Happy New Year.
Please join with me in our affirmation of faith. Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. In him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross.